Welcome to episode number 124 of the Marine Layer podcast. We welcome on the co-host of the Locked On Mariners podcast, Ty Dane Gonzalez. We chat about the Mariners season so far, where they can still improve, and about the Mariners content creator community. We have our two Mariners storylines discussing Jarred Kelenic's return to Seattle and Matt Brash being shut down indefinitely.
Guys, make sure you're not missing out on any of our content. If you want to make sure you're on top of it all, there's a couple different things you can do. If you're listening to these podcasts, be sure to download, be sure to leave a 5-star review. You're doing us a big favor if you do. If you're watching on YouTube, I know you guys see the big subscribe button. Just take a second and click it. Leave a like, leave a comment over on YouTube. And if you're on social media, which most of you probably are, make sure you're hitting the follow buttons over there too. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube Shorts at Marine Layer Pod.
Let's get it rolling.
The pitch from Acevedo. A drive deep to right field. Down the line. The Mariners win this game 2-1. The dream lives. They're going to the playoffs. 1-1 from Jansen. There you go. Left field. We got a tie ball game. Julio. Oh, baby, what a moment. Tie ball game at 7-7.
And we welcome you to this episode of the Marine Layer podcast, part of the Just Baseball Podcast Network, recording post-game Monday, April 29th. You were there tonight, Lyle. Oh my goodness, Mitch Garver, finally, he gets a cookie over the middle, and such an epic swing sailing into the night.
Don't lie, you thought they were getting no hit.
I did, yeah. Some of those swings on those breaking balls. So they fooled me. I thought that pitch to Mitch Garver was a breaking ball. It was a cutter instead. It was close. It was moving a little bit, but man, dude, I was getting really sick and tired of watching sliders get swung on and missed. That was tough. That eighth inning was tough, but man, all it takes is one swing. That's what, like, when Bryce Miller pitches how he did tonight, it literally just takes one of those Mitch Garver swings. That's it. That's all they needed.
And the Mariners rotation as a whole, you can say that about Bryce Miller for sure, but a bunch of these guys. And the fact that Mitch Garver and Jorge Polanco, what do we keep talking about? When those two guys, and obviously Julio, start hitting the way everybody knows they're capable of hitting and the way people are expecting them to hit, we're going to have a much different conversation about the offense. I know right now there's a lot of discourse, there's a lot of strikeouts, not enough production. When you see those three guys start to hit the way they're supposed to, and they will, I know everybody likes to freak out over a month of games. They are going to. Things are going to look a lot different.
I'm going to give a shout out to Jordan Schussman before we jump into our first storyline. So Jordan tweeted out, the Mariners over the last week, they have like a team OPS of about 500, striking out 35% of the time, and the Mariners are 5-2 in those games. See what happens if you just score some runs? You might never lose a game with this pitching staff.
And why we keep talking about, please just get into the playoffs. Please, with this rotation, just get in. Because they can do so many things. Yeah, that's crazy. That's the thing. Aside from all these offensive struggles at certain points of the first month, they're still in first. They're in first place. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yes, they are in first place and hopefully continue in first place a lot longer. Let's get into our Mariners storylines. With Atlanta coming to Seattle, it was the return of one Jarred Kelenic. So it's funny how this all ties in. The beginning ties in because the walk-off home run went screaming right over Jarred's head into the left field bleachers. But Jarred came home. He was in the lineup tonight. He was sitting at the bottom of the Braves order. And, vibes from the ballpark, I think I was expecting a little bit more of a harsher reaction. If you didn't miss it, it was a good, decent, I would say, applause for Jarred as he stepped to the plate. It wasn't quite Geno level, what we saw this past weekend, but it was not as harsh as I thought from what Jarred's reception was coming back home to Seattle. And I'm proud of that, to be honest. I'm proud that most fans were able to sort of let go of whatever negative feelings they held towards him now that he's no longer a Mariner.
You see what happens when you have to spend ridiculous amounts of time on social media like the two of us do for the sake of this podcast? This is what happens. Like, we get encapsulated into the idea that all the commenters on social media represent the entire fan base. Because what keeps happening? We talk about Jarred Kelenic, whether it's on our live streams, whether it's on some of our social posts, whether it's tweets. We see all these reactions saying, I'm booing him. he doesn't deserve an applause, like this and that, like he failed the organization, all this stuff. Like, and then you remind yourself, oh, most of the fan base aren't all the shit posters online. Most of this fan base has a pretty level head. And that was really nice to see, the fact that he came into the ballpark, he had his first at bat, and he did get an applause. I'm not saying he was as productive as Gino was in the 2 years that Gino was here versus the 3 that Kelenic was here, but people still understand that he's a good dude, that he grinded his tail off, that he gave it everything he had, like he said in his presser here on Monday. And people still gave him an applause, which was nice. Like that is a nice reality check when you see, oh, the whole fan base isn't represented in social media comments. And sometimes I think we need a reality check of that. Almost reminds me of when we went to the playoff game and thinking to myself, you know, Mariners Twitter and the community, it can be so toxic sometimes. And then when we were at that playoff game, it was all just happy-go-lucky and positive vibes and upbeat energy from everybody. There was no like payroll Twitter this and Mariners are doomed that. It was just a lot of positivity. So tying that all back to Jarred, I think we saw a lot of that on Monday night.
And just thinking through it, Mark, it really just didn't make sense of why people would boo him. First of all, like I thought he was getting booed mostly because of our comments. Like we got some really pretty nasty stuff, to be honest. We pushed out a lot of Jarred content here on Monday. Like you were there at the ballpark trying to sort of encapsulate his return. He spoke to the media. He had a few things to say, all very positive about, you know, his time in Seattle, what he learned, talking to the media, et cetera, all this kind of stuff. But you know, we made sure to highlight that. And to be honest, like reading some of the replies to the stuff we put out there and some of our DMs, I was kind of expecting some more. I thought that thought process would translate to more people who don't spend all day online and just think that, period, and are not don't absorb that. But again, so glad that's not a reality, because if you think about it, like if Taijuan Walker came back to Seattle, is he getting booed? He was a top 10 prospect, didn't pan out in Seattle. So you getting booed?
No, he's not.
No, he's not. Is Dustin Ackley getting booed? Number 2 overall pick when he comes back to Seattle? I don't think so. Danny Holtzen? No. Like all these guys are really high, really important draft picks that were all supposed to fill the role of Jarred Kelenic. Like do what Jarred Kelenic was supposed to do when he came up to Seattle. And like none of those guys were ever going to get booed. So why could Jarred? And then I thought you did a good job on the live stream breaking it down. Okay, it's not about the player he is. It wouldn't be about the player he is. It's about who he is as a person for the most part.
Yeah. I said it on the live stream. I honestly wonder how much people's opinions of Jarred Kelenic would be different if he was just more like if he looked like one of us, so to speak. The thing is, the analogy I used on the live stream is he looks like the head of Rush at Arizona State Sigma Chi. Like, I'm not saying that's who he is as a person, but just if you look at him from afar, that's kind of what he looks like. Some people like to joke he looks like Johnny Lawrence or an 80s movie villain.
He looks like Homelander from The Boys. Homelander?
Okay,
you know yeah, you know Homelanders.
So, yeah, there's another. Like, I almost think it's the persona. Like, he's in very good shape. He's got the spiky blonde hair. Like, I think that, whether people admit it or not, I think that plays some factor into it, paired with everybody knows he's very intense. Everybody knows he has his outbursts. Not at his teammates, not at fans. It was never that. But I still think all of that combined played a factor. And I also think the factor of who he was hyped up to be in the trade played a factor as well. Because look, you can be a high draft pick and you can get excited, but like there was so much put on him when that trade happened and when he started to ascend through the minors that people started to, again, have the idea in their heads that, and me included, I'm certainly very guilty of this, that, oh, the Mariners got rid of Robinson Cano and Edwin Diaz, but they're going to make it out like bandits because of how good Jarred Kelenic is going to be. And that didn't happen. So I think people, like not us, but I think there are people that had similar expectations, but because he didn't live up to it, they unleashed anger on him because of the expectations that they set in their heads.
Now, I think there was another observation around the story of Jarred Kelenic that you picked up on. Our friend Justin Toscano, who we've had on this podcast, who writes for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, wrote a really nice piece about Jarred that printed today. You can find it online. He tweeted it out. It's all over there. It'd be pretty easy to find. But
by today, you mean Monday?
Yeah, today meaning Monday. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. But there is an interesting line in there that you picked up on, and I think sort of reflected on in some of the comments that were made today. So you wanna I'll tee you up for it.
Yeah. So, like you said, it was a nice piece, and it was about how Jarred Kelenic has changed as a person. And after he kicked the cooler and broke his foot, he talked about, he realized who Jarred Kelenic is much more than just what his slash line is as a baseball player, essentially. But when you get into the story, there is a part in there that Jarred Kelenic talks about. He essentially had no relationship with either Jerry Dipoto or Scott Service. Now, the Dipoto thing had been highlighted a little bit because he was on foul territory over the winter after the trade, and he had talked about he didn't love Jerry's comments about the 54% stuff. He had some things to say about it himself. And he also got asked in that interview, did you and Jerry talk much? And Jarred said in that interview on foul territory, he said, like, no, not really. We didn't talk. There wasn't much of a relationship. Now, that's not totally uncommon for player and GM or player and president of baseball ops. Sometimes those high up front office guys purposely choose not to get super close to the players because, as Billy Beane talks about in Moneyball, you can't develop personal relationships with guys a lot of the time to the point where it clouds your judgment to not be able to make baseball sound moves. So I don't know if that's Jerry's philosophy or not, but maybe it is. And maybe that's a part of the reason they didn't have a really close relationship. But I do want to focus more on the Scott Service thing, because that is the one that puzzles me a lot more, because Scott Service, as we know, is is a master at developing player relationships. He's awesome with it. You hear all these players talk about how great Scott is. Everybody talks about Scott's got the dad vibes, and people look at him in that way, but like they really respect him as a manager, but they always love being around him. And it sounds like that wasn't really how it was with Jarred Kelenic and Scott Service. And then when you listen to Scott Service talk, it reflected that too. So Justin wrote that, and obviously we trust him. He's a great reporter and is awesome at what he does. But if you just want to double up on that, if you listen to what Scott Service said about Eugenio Suarez coming back to town, we tweeted out both clips. If you listen to Scott talk about Gino on Friday, he really goes into detail about, like in spring training, there was a game we weren't even playing the Diamondbacks, and Gino just came into the dugout. He started hanging out, and people started laughing about that. And then Scott says, Gino is one of my favorite all-time guys. Love being around him. Like, always miss him. All that stuff. Now, managers have favorites. That's totally normal. But then when he got asked about Jarred returning on Monday, it was much more of a cliche answer of, look, he's got a lot of baseball left in him. He's got time to figure things out. Trades do happen. Sometimes things don't work out in certain places and you get a chance somewhere else. The answers were very, very different when talking about Gino versus Kelenic. And Gino can be a favorite, but it does feel like, again, for this is not a Scott Service thing, because we know Scott's great at developing player relationships, but it does seem like with this pairing, yeah, something was off.
Bad personality mix, perhaps? Like the level of intenseness from Jarred was not, I don't know, didn't reflect well between the two. Like, it's all speculation at this point, but you sit here and think Jarred spent about a little over a year's time on the big league roster, right? About, give or take, about a year. That's enough time to build a relationship with your manager. And if Jarred was always going to be a part of the big league roster, which until, let's say, August of last year, he was always a part of the Mariners' future, and they always had that in him. Well, like Scott then, like you would imagine Scott would have more of that relationship with him, even if he's in AAA, because he knows that's his potential future corner outfielder. But that wasn't the case. So I like, my early speculation is just it wasn't a personality mix, right? If there was something philosophically different between the two that didn't mesh that well, right? And I don't know who's like where the initiation was lacking from. I would guess Scott, but I don't know. Like I really don't know, because each person is different. So it's kind of a puzzling thing, to be honest.
It may be on both sides. Like it may just be equal on both sides. And like you said, it may just be as simple as the personalities didn't mesh. And that may be part of the reason that the Mariners decided to move on this winter. And that doesn't mean Jarred Kelenic's a bad person. We all know that's not true. We all know, while he's wired very differently, he has all the best intentions. It just may have not been eye to eye on philosophical views between him and the Mariners. Maybe the Braves are better for him. Maybe Brian Snitker is a better manager for Jarred Kelenic. Maybe those two will mesh better. We'll see.
They're both Wisconsinites, though.
That's true.
Right?
Well, do you like every single person in the state of Washington?
No. Both Packers. Like, there are, like, we know there's similar interests, though. Like, they're both Packers fans, for example.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
You never know. These things are so complicated. But it's something that, you know, unless Justin didn't write about that, we would have never noticed, never came to light. So it's certainly another interesting wrinkle in the Jarred Kelenic Seattle story, which...
Yeah. That was never told previously. And if it was, it certainly didn't ever make its rounds. But yeah, that was interesting. So obviously, as we know, we'll see what Jarred does the rest of the series Tuesday and Wednesday. He had a hit in the Monday game. But as everybody who knows this podcast, I will continuously root for Jarred Kelenic to do well. We're going to try and talk to him this week too. Like, do a question with him. I hope we get a chance to flag him down, because it'd be cool if we did. And it'd probably be about his, like, a positive light question about his time in Seattle and tee him up for something. But yeah, I hope that works out. And obviously, just going forward with Kelenic, I'm always rooting for him.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah. Okay, before we get to our second storyline, let's take a pause and talk to you guys about our friends at Pagotch's Pub 85. You guys want a place to watch the games? Mariners are on a roll. You probably want to get out with your friends, get together, watch some winning baseball. Well, find a good restaurant to do it, and you don't have to look any further than Pub 85. If you head over there in Kirkland, you can have an awesome time with your friends, have some great food. You want to play some darts, some pool, all that stuff. And if you get there within happy hour, you'll get some great deals. It's Monday through Friday happy hours from 2 to 6 p.m. There's $3 domestic beers. There's $4 Manny's and Blue Moons, $4 Mac and Jacks, $4 Wells, and $4 house wines. All of that over at Pagotch's Pub 85 in Kirkland. Well, I hate to turn the podcast to such a negative tone here, but we are going to have to do it. Matt Brash has been shut down indefinitely. Justin Hollander announced that on Saturday. On Friday, Matt Brash was at the ballpark and he was throwing, and he was out with his teammates doing his usual stuff. I mean, he was starting to ramp up. Justin said on that Friday, we'll see how he responds tomorrow. If he feels good, he could be heading out to Tacoma for a rehab assignment on Saturday. Everybody's thinking to themselves, great. We are on the doorstep of getting Matt Brash back. Arguably, the best reliever in this bullpen is just days away from getting back to pitching in games. On Saturday, Hollander holds another media session. People start to gather around. I'm thinking to myself, this isn't going to be good, is it? Now, I thought there was a chance there was something that was going to be said about George Kirby, because, you know, he got pushed back a day. Scott said he wasn't feeling great after his last start. That ended up being nothing, because George absolutely dealt on Saturday against the Diamondbacks. What happens is Justin Hollander says, I want to give you guys an update on Matt Brash. He's not responding well to when he ramps up. He's been shut down indefinitely. He's heading back to Dallas to meet with Dr. Meister. They're going to go over some more options. And Hollander did say, we are concerned. Doesn't sound great. If I'm going to be totally honest, this feels like it's trending toward Tommy John. I hope I am wrong, but it doesn't feel like it's heading in a good direction.
And the problem for Brash was not ramping up. He was getting all the way up to what he wanted to. The sliders were good. The fastballs were good. But the recovery and the soreness in his arm was not. And that's where, you know, he said after the first time, it's usually you're supposed to be sore. But then the few times after that, it's supposed to get easier and easier and easier to bounce back. And it was not getting easier. And it got to the point on Friday where he threw in that session and said every throw felt awful. And that's not a good sign. Certainly not a good sign. So I'm sitting here and setting my expectation as I'm not expecting to see Matt Brash in the next 365 days, at least.
That line is the dagger.
Yeah.
Like we don't know anything yet. We're gonna have to wait till there's an official announcement. But hearing Matt Brash say every throw felt terrible, I do not like the sound of that at all. Like, no. It's good that he can ramp up and get up to his max stuff. It's just like he's not responding. Like again, he's not starting to feel better yet. Which, look, if you want to try and play glass half full, let's do that for 60 seconds here. If you want to try and play glass half full, maybe there's a chance Matt Brash goes down to Dallas, meets with the doctors. They say it's soreness, it's additional soreness. There's a little bit of further inflammation. There's nothing torn. It's not a UCL. You're going to have to you're going to have to wait it out for a couple weeks now and get back into a throwing program. If you want to look at it like that, Maybe there's a chance that Brash shuts it down for another couple weeks. If he gets back to ramping it up, maybe he starts to feel better. Maybe he can get back in later June or July and still pitch the second half of the year. But that feels like, I don't know, I'll put it at a 5% chance. I hate saying that too. I love watching Matt Brash. Honestly, of every arm on this team, I think he's my favorite to watch, starters and relievers included. Just like when he's on, there's nobody more disgusting than Matt Brash to watch. And I know how important he is to this bullpen. So to see him trending this way, man, it really does suck.
I had to put on some Marvin's Room last night and just scroll through Pitching Ninja's Twitter, watching Matt Brash sliders over and over and over again to make myself feel better. Because, that's probably the only, it feels like that's most likely we're not going to see those Matt Brash sliders this year. So then the question turns around on the Mariners bullpen, Lyle. How do they replace what Matt Brash did last year? And we spent a lot of the offseason sort of detailing the Matt Brash role of what they wanted to do with him last year. Yeah, he had a lot of appearances, but he had a very specific role. He came up in the first danger situation of every single game. And trying to think of which Mariners reliever occupies that role now and if they can sustain it throughout the season, because frankly, no reliever in that bullpen, as good as they is quite like Matt Brash. It is really hard to match. But you know what? First of all, Trent Thornton has sort of occupied that role, like first higher leverage situation. It's not quite the same as Brash because he's not Brash, but he's been pretty good this year. And if you think about it, their pitching profiles are actually pretty similar, Lyle. Focus on a fastball and a sweeper. That's it. Thornton has a slider too, like a bullet slider, but fastball slider combination for the two of them. Thornton doesn't throw quite as hard as Matt Brash, but he's been pretty effective this year. And he's been one of the first guys out of the bullpen on game days they've been trying to win games, and it has been successful so far. The question is, does that hold up throughout the course of the season? The numbers right now would suggest yes.
That'd be great. Look, the Mariners are still the number one bullpen in baseball right now by ERA. It's not like they're struggling. It's just the idea of when Brash and Santos would have hypothetically gotten back. Well, Santos is still on the right track to get back. But with all those guys getting back, thinking about what this bullpen could be, that's what's breaking my heart. I legitimately believe what I said once the Mariners signed Ryan Stanek and what the two of us had talked about. When healthy, this had the chance to be the best Mariners bullpen in the history of the franchise. I fully put my stamp of belief on that. Look at what they're doing without Brash and Santos right now. They're number one in bullpen ERA in baseball without two of the best relievers in baseball. Now, if those two got back, I mean, like the Mariners could score 10 runs throughout the postseason and win the World Series or something like that with this rotation in this bullpen. But to not have Brash, it changes things. They're still going to be a really good bullpen, but it's not the same bullpen.
I think the key now is getting Santos back. If they can get Santos back, they'll probably be okay.
Yeah.
Like they won't have it won't be the Maserati. Instead, it'll be a step below that. What's a step below Maserati? Do you know? Are you that car fluent?
A Porsche?
Sure. Yeah. We got the Porsche. We got the Porsche, not the sedan, the whichever one that has the four doors. Anyways, that's what we're talking about. Slightly lower level sports car, but we make it work. I think they'll make it work.
And look, if the Mariners think they need one more arm at the deadline, they could go get another arm at the deadline. I'll give Ty credit for this idea, and we do talk about it a little bit in the interview if you want to hear more about it. But here's an idea, people. If the Diamondbacks continue to not play well, and they're around the 500 mark at the deadline, and there's a certain reliever in that bullpen with half a year of club control that's about to hit free agency, and you're not going to the playoffs, maybe there's a team that could use him. Maybe there's a team that could trade for him. He's not going to cost a lot for 2 months. You know who I'm talking about, too. Think about how sick it would be if they got Paul Sewald back.
That would be pretty sick. So don't get my hopes up, Lyle.
If you want to see that happen, root for the Diamondbacks to keep losing games. Because, again, like right-handed arm, you feel like you need one more high-leverage guy. Don't totally rule it out. That's all I'll say.
I think that's the only thing that would fill the Matt Brash size hole in my heart.
Same.
Yeah.
So Yeah. Anyway, we'll get into that a little bit more in our convo with Ty. But to wrap this up, we will sit here, we will cross our fingers, hope somehow, some way Brash can avoid another major bullet, but doesn't sound great.
Speaking of Ty, really enjoyed having him on the podcast here for the first time. So we went on the Locked On Mariners podcast in February.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in February. And Ty was doing a Mariners content creator series, highlight series, highlighting all the wonderful people in this community who cover the Mariners from a fan perspective. And it's helped Lyle and I make some connections around the Mariners content community. And it was glad to be able to sort of bring it into this interview where we talked to Ty a little bit about this, group of people that are now non-traditional media types that are still focused around creating content around the Mariners every single day. We also sort of, like you put it, sort of zoomed out month-wide view of the Mariners so far and focused on some specific storylines. But Ty's a really smart dude. He's been, he knows what he's talking about, watches a lot of baseball, works his butt off with Colby on the Locked On Mariners podcast, and he's a fantastic guy to have on.
Yeah, this was a blast of a conversation, and you just said it. Like, we spent probably the second half of the conversation talking about content and the Mariners content community, but the first half of it, TJ and I usually dive into a couple storylines on each episode, but this was a nice way through a month in. We kind of do a bird's eye view of what's the bigger picture looking like a month in, and to have the three of us kind of sit there and recap some of it. Yeah, it was a fun conversation.
All right, let's get to our conversation now with Ty Dane Gonzalez. All right, we got our friend Ty Dane Gonzalez, the co-host of the Locked On Mariners podcast, on here with us. Ty, thanks so much for taking some time to join us. We're exactly a month into the season now, so we're going to kick this off with a bang. Give me your hottest Mariners take right now.
Firstly, thank you, boys, for having me on. I really enjoyed our conversation that we had on my show, and I'm glad that we're able to do this again. Hottest take, Josh Rojas is an all-star.
How awesome would that be if the Mariners all of a sudden, just out of thin air, had one all-star caliber infielder? He's on the shelf right now, but JP will come back. And then Rojas comes out. I mean, he continues to just do this. Like, there's no... Yeah. And then Jerry can go around and say, yeah, well, obviously, that's why I've been trying to trade for Josh for 2 years, because this is the kind of stuff this guy has in him.
Right. And I mean, we saw towards the end of last year, he made the swing change and he started to produce a lot more so in August than in September. But still, like, we started to kind of see this version of Josh Rojas develop. And then, yeah, he's been fantastic this year. Now, on the all-star front, I think right now, like, he has been one of the best third basemen in all of baseball. I wonder how much of him being part of a platoon, though, is going to impact his chances of being recognized on that kind of level. But he's had a great year, and I mean, he's been a massive boon for this team when, Mitch Garver isn't really producing right now. Jorge Polanco's not really producing. Like, they've needed Josh Rojas and Luis Arias as well to a certain degree in order to kind of stay afloat offensively.
What's funny is him and JP at their peaks aren't too dissimilar as hitters. They feel similar.
Yeah, like they have very good understandings of the strike zone. They have about 15 to 20 homer pop, right? Like, yeah, they're fairly similar hitters when you really think about it. I think JP's going to walk more than Josh, but overall, yeah, I think it is a pretty similar overall profile.
It's funny just seeing the reaction at the ballpark this weekend, and people obviously were thrilled to see Gino back in town. He was such a fan favorite. We all know that. And just seeing it for myself, just from the human standpoint, I certainly said, yeah, it's easy to forget just how loved Gino was in this city and by his teammates, by this fan base. But also with that, seeing what Rojas has done, seeing what Urias has done, I hope people can come to the conclusion of you can miss Gino, but also understand from the baseball standpoint that there is good reason that they moved on from him. And we're seeing it with the platoon right now.
Oh, yeah. Emotionally speaking, I still miss Gino.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Love Gino. Wish he was, wish there was a way that he could be a part of this thing still. But while the trade was undeniably partly made for salary purposes, I think there was truly another side of that trade that was made because they thought Gino had hit the cliff, or he was approaching the cliff at least. And so far, through the first 28 games or however many Gino's played, it seems like they're right on that front. Now, a lot of things can change in a short amount of time because we're still so early on in the season, but Gino hasn't been that good. I think he's running somewhere around an 80 WRC plus right now. I know the defensive metrics haven't been a big fan of him, unlike last year. And, Rojas on the flip side of that has been excellent, like we talked about. And when he's not playing and Arias has come in, Arias hasn't had a ton of hits, but he's made a pretty large impact. He's had a couple of big home runs. While he's struck out quite a bit, I feel like his quality of plate appearances has been overall pretty good. Like he seems to have a generally pretty good understanding of the strike zone. I've been fairly impressed with Arias as well, but it seems like right now, the Mariners kind of they made a bet this offseason that Gino was kind of reaching the end, and that Rojas and Arias, some combination of those two guys, gave him a better shot. And so far, it seems like they've made good on that bet so far. So see how it continues. But like I said, right now, like that third base spot, like that's kind of in a way been a saving grace for this team.
Let's stay on the offensive side of the ball. Where are you at with this team offensively right now?
I think some of it is just still waiting for like the guys that are supposed to be the driving force of this thing being the driving force of this thing. Like, even though Julio's had like all the multi-hit games and all that, he's not doing a ton of damage still. It's been a lot of singles. And we got his first home run down in Texas, but you would like to see him do more damage than he's doing right now. And then, we kind of saw it today in the third. I don't know when you guys are posting on this, but we're recording this on Sunday night after the Diamondbacks loss. Like, we saw this during the third inning today when they had the bases loaded and one out, and they got into the middle part of the order. And there just isn't really someone that you can consistently depend on to provide the kill shot in that situation. So that's another issue, right? Like, some guys have popped here and there. Like, Mitch Haniger has obviously been pretty good to start the year, and there's been some encouraging signs from Ty France, and Jorge Polanco's walking a lot right now. He's not doing a ton of damage with the bat, but he's at least been walking a good amount. But there hasn't been like that guy in that 4 to 7-ish range in this lineup that has consistently come through in those situations. So it's kind of just right now, I just feel like this offense is still trying to figure out what it is and what it has to work with and what they're going to ultimately have to address at some point this season. And it's still just waiting on guys like Julio to produce more consistently. Because like right now with Julio, even outside of that little streak that he went on with the multiple hits, like it's been one like pretty solid game and then one just awful looking game where he strikes out 3 times and he grounds out the other at bat. So waiting for if I'm waiting for like a stretch from Julio where it's like, all right, 2 for 3 with a double and a 2-run home run, and then the next night it's like 1 for 4 with a single and a stolen base. Like, not like one extreme end of the spectrum and then the other the next night. So just looking for a bit more consistency out of Julio. And then obviously Cal's been great, but they need really like a consistent third guy in the middle of the order, right? Because like I feel pretty good about Rojas, I feel pretty good about Julio, I feel pretty good about Cal, but you don't really know right now what you're going to get out of Mitch, both of the Mitches on a night-to-night basis. You don't really know what you're going to get out of Ty. Like, you just need more consistency out of someone, and it really just only needs to be one guy right now in the heart of that order.
Yeah, it's like the two twins, or well, Garver was a Ranger, obviously won the World Series. But when I think of Garver and Polanco, if those two guys hit the way that everybody expects them to hit, things change immensely with the offense. I think it's fair to say. So TJ and I talked about this before the season started. We said, who is the most impactful hitter on the team this year other than Julio? Like, what's your prediction? I said Garver. When we asked Jason Churchill, he said Garver. TJ said Polanco. And I think that kind of encompasses like the point here, which is if those two guys hit the way they're supposed to, you're going to see this offense change big time. It's just about when is it going to click for those guys?
Right. This team has really struggled to find the Robin to Julio's Batman. They tried it last year with Teoscar, and this year there's a couple of guys that could potentially fit that mold, whether that's, Polanco or Garver, and they just haven't really gotten that yet. Right. And I don't really view, like, for as good as Cal is or has been and is right now, I don't really see him as like a candidate for that. I kind of view him in a different light, because with catchers, like, great hitting catchers still aren't, like, relative to the rest of hitters in baseball, still not great, right? There's still a lot of, like, swing and miss in Cal's game, and there's going to be low averages and all that stuff, right? Like, so I kind of view him differently. But with Polanco and Garver, like, you need one of those guys to essentially be the Robin to Julio's Batman, right? To kind of pick up, like, because, like, Julio is going to have those bad nights where he strikes out 3 times and he goes 0 for 4, right? You need someone that can pick up the slack on those nights. Like, don't worry, man, I got you tonight. Like, it's cool. And, like, can give you 2 for 4 with, a couple of doubles, right? Or double and a single and a couple of rips, right? So Garver's supposed to be that guy. That's what Teo was supposed to be last year. Polanco could also be that guy. It's just right now they're not really performing, but I'm still not at a point yet where I'm overly concerned about it. I'm a little bit more concerned with Garver than Polanco, because Garver right now, it's pretty apparent he's struggling to pick up spin. And he is kind of dealing with something similar that Ty France is dealing with, and it's a bit of a launch angle issue. Like, when he is hitting the ball hard, he's hitting it on the ground. Like, he needs to elevate more, because he's actually hit the ball with some consistency. He's hit the ball hard with some consistency. Just he needs to lift the ball a bit more. Polanco at least is contributing in some way, like I mentioned with the walks. Like, he's walking almost 20% of the time right now. He's also striking out a ton, but he's been able to counteract that. But right now, he's just kind of a true outcome player at the moment. So need more output with the bat from Polanco, and I think that's eventually going to come. He's also notorious for starting out slow. So I think that's just kind of who he is, and we'll see him start to get it going here as the calendar turns. But Garver, meanwhile, there's some issues. Like, we're seeing him expand the zone, which he hasn't really done historically. He's really struggling to pick up spin. I know, like, they're trying to work on things and make some adjustments with him, and they're trying to take that slowly, but they need him. They need him with the way that the roster is built right now and the way that the lineup is built. Like, they need Mitch Garver to be at least something.
And another disappointing fact about Garver is even though he might feel pressure on himself, the pressure of the lineup's not on him. He's about in as low pressure of a spot as possible. I think you'd understand a little bit more Polanco, because he's right there in the 3 spot. He's got 2 good on base guys in front of him. He wants to drive those guys in, and unfortunately, again, hasn't happened yet. But Garver's all the way down there in the 7 hole. And they've done what they've could to take the pressure off of him and just let him go out there and DH. Only DH. They haven't forced him behind the plate yet, which another asinine thing I can't believe people are actually suggesting they do, but given his injury history. But we've seen that, but it's been just DHing, just focused on hitting. And and he's not even really hitting fastballs either, which is his calling card. Is like, hey, I want to get a fastball in the zone. I'm going to pull it in the air. Has not done that very much at all. So he's got some time, which is a good thing. But, he's been such a good hitter in his career. I think people are just like a little puzzled. Like, why could that be that all these things are happening? Why now? What's the difference between this year and last year?
Right. I do wonder. And unfortunately, this data isn't really public. Only some people have access to this data through True Media, and that's bat speed data. I do wonder if it's a bat speed issue with Garver, and we've seen a couple of ticks down in the miles per hour there.
Have you? I have that graph that was floated out there on Twitter the other day of the bat speed graph. Like, when you're when you hit, it's like when you hit 30, it starts going like sharply down. It's like a slow decline until you get 30, and then it goes like a very sharp decline. He's right in the middle of that. Some guys can get around that. The best ones of all time can. But yeah, you got to wonder. You got to wonder.
Yeah, well, because it's going back to Eugenio Suarez, right? Like that's kind of the biggest issue that they were concerned with, because his bat speed did go significantly down in 2023. So as Garver kind of hit a similar cliff, you kind of have to wonder about that. But look, we have 26 games of data on him right now. I don't want to jump the gun here. And especially because he has been such a good hitter when he has been healthy, that you got to think that he's going to turn around until he really gives you a reason. And by reason, I mean months of data to believe that that's just not going to happen. So it's just, you kind of just have to play the waiting game with him. I know that's really frustrating for fans, especially, continuing to watch the quality of plate appearances that he's put up, which has been horrible while he's trying to figure it out. But that's really all you can do. And that's all the Mariners can really afford to do right now. Like they need him. They need him to figure this thing out before, they start looking elsewhere, which again, they can't really do anything about Garver's spot on the roster because of all the money that he's making. But like in terms of like making another addition, right, and getting more aggressive in that department. So, we'll just, again, we just gotta kind of have to play the waiting game with it right now, and hopefully he gets it together, because like, again, good Mitch Garver would be a massive boon to this lineup and would drastically change things, as well as a good Jorge Polanco.
I'm going to pick up the vibe of this conversation a little bit, because we just had to talk about Garver and we talked about Polanco. They're not off to great starts.
Sure.
Team perspective as a whole, the drastic change in April has been pretty remarkable to see. I mean, we went from, all the reasonable people of Mariners Twitter 2 weeks into the season saying season's over to
right
now they're in first place. Like the first 2 weeks of the season compared to the last couple weeks of the season, the turnaround has been not just noticeable, but pretty awesome. And like a lot of it has to do with the starting pitching, of course.
Yeah.
But like, how much do you get sucked into that when those small sample of games has happened and you have nothing else to go off?
Well, it's, in a way, it's vindication, right? For like, months of this offseason being spent talking about how great this rotation is. It's the best in baseball, which I truly, truly believe. And then, the first couple weeks of the year, like pitching staff for the most part wasn't doing well, right? Castillo was a disaster. Kirby was a disaster for a couple of those starts, and it's like, what's going on? But also it's like, okay, look, everything's like melting down around us right now, but let's take a step back for a second here. Do we really think this rotation is this bad? Really? Like suddenly all these, George Kirby just suddenly forgot how to pitch, right? And I know like September was also bad for Luis, but still, like we think that just Luis Castillo went from dominant for the first, like through the first 5 months of last year and just suddenly fell off a cliff. Like, come on, let's be real with ourselves, right? So I think really what we've seen over the last couple of weeks is just who this team truly is, right? It's a team that's built to be a run prevention club, and that isn't just defense reliant, right? Because I know, some people hear that and they go, well, this team isn't really the most defensively inclined. Run prevention is also like, it begins and ends really with your pitching staff, with your rotation. This is the best rotation in baseball. Like, and we're seeing that. And what's crazy about this too, right, is like, we haven't even seen Brian Wu pitch.
Mm-mm.
We haven't even seen Brian Wu pitch yet. And now, like, I know Bryce had kind of a hiccup in his last start against Texas, but the growth we've seen from him and that splitter and the step forward he's taken with his slider as well this year, I think they legitimately have a big four now. And so, and again, that's without, we don't even know what Brian Wu is going to be able to provide in his second season in the majors, right? So it's so exciting. And it's like we talked about with Gary Hill on our show last week. This team, this lineup doesn't have to score a ton of runs every night because of the way they've built this rotation, with how good this rotation is, right? It's not an ideal way to win baseball games, right? You would love to just put up 9 runs every single night and shut every team out as well, right? Like there's no rule against having both an elite pitching staff and an elite offense. Like, don't get me wrong, but with the way that the team is built right now, like you don't need to put up, most nights you probably don't need to put up more than 2 or 3 runs with how well this pitching staff is going right now. So really, like what I'm looking for is once the offense kind of balances itself out, and look, the pitching staff is going to regress a little bit here because they've given up 24 runs in their last 16 games or something like that. It's insane. Like they're going to regress some to the mean. I think so. I mean, I would love it if they didn't, but like they're going to regress some. But like if the offense can just balance out, and Polanco can kind of get it together, and Garver can get it together, and JP returns and all this stuff. If they can just more consistently put up 3, 4, 5 runs every single night, like we don't need a big 17-run game. If they can just give us 3, 4, 5 runs every single night or most nights, like they're going to win a lot of ball games, because it's going to be very rare that we see pitching performances like the ones that we saw in the first couple weeks of the season. That's an outlier.
Which through the whole turn of the rotation, which one's the most appointment viewing for you?
Ooh, that's. I mean, like when you think about like what George did last night against the Diamondbacks, like that is. Like I don't even know if I can say what I want to say right now on this podcast. Like what George Kirby did last night was mind blowing. We'll go with that. We'll go with mind blowing. Yeah, that was so fun to watch. I think right now, though, for me, I'm having a great time watching Bryce Miller pitch, because again, like seeing the step forward that the slider has taken, that splitter is disgusting when it's on, and the fastballs just continue to get better and better. I really love watching Bryce pitch, but I mean, you can't go wrong with really any of the 4 guys. And I don't want to like discredit Emerson Hancock here, but like overall his stuff isn't great. But like he's battling, and he's a pretty smart pitcher who has taken a leap forward with his command and control as well over the last few starts. So he's been fun to watch in that regard. But in terms of just pure stuff, Bryce right now for me is really fun. But watching Logan has been insane. Like when I watched Logan Gilbert pitch this year, and even today, he didn't have his best stuff, whatever. Kind of had a hard time finishing out innings today, but when I've watched him this year, I'm like, that looks like a Cy Young winner. Mm-hmm. Like that looks like a guy that's ready for that next step, right? So yeah, he's been so much fun to watch. And I mean, Luis, obviously you can't go wrong with Luis either. But my answer right now is Bryce Miller for sure. What about you guys?
I like the Bryce answer, mostly because so his stuff's great, his demeanor's been great, but I think it's more so the fact it's like newfound success in a different way. So like we're used to seeing Logan go out there, especially from what we saw last year with a retooled slider and a splitter, go out there, and if he has a great fastball, he can go out there and dominate. And he did that at times last year. So far this year, he's done that more consistently. We know that George Kirby has more upside than just about anyone in baseball when it comes to throwing the baseball and pitching and being like a pure pitcher with the combination of command and stuff. And then Luis Castillo, is like enters the season as the number 1 in the rotation. So it's like, yeah, okay. So all that seems to be given. But Bryce comes into the season like, okay, well, we're expecting to see something new, and we have. So when the new stuff comes along, it's like, it is that much more grabbing. It's like, this is appointment television, because especially when he breaks out the Cueto shimmy, it's like, he's just out there fucking around.
Yeah, he's just having a shit ton of fun. It's awesome. It's awesome. Yeah, like the Cueto shimmy was hilarious, because I'm like, okay, he's in his bag now. Like he's kind of gotten over like the rookie jitters, right, that you deal with for your first, 20, 30 starts. And like he's finding like a comfort level. Like he's starting to feel like, oh, I belong here now.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, right now, this second, I'd say Logan Gilbert. But when everybody's healthy, I love to watch Brian Wu pitch. And for the same thought process that the two of you have about what Bryce Miller's done and his newfound stuff, that's kind of how I feel with Wu. Like with as fun as it is to watch Luis, George, and Logan, we know what those guys are. And obviously those guys can continue to get better, but they've already cemented themselves for the most part as, the three of them combined top 15, 20 pitchers in the game, all three of them. With Wu and Miller too, it's fun to watch the idea of what they can be, and every start them learning a little bit more and finding themselves that much more. Because Brian Wu, look, I know he's missed the first month of the year. This guy's stuff, like the pure stuff people have talked about, screams
it's ridiculous.
Frontline upside. And that's your number 5 guy. Like, that's what I hang on to the most. When your number 5 guy has a chance one day to be a frontline starter, I love watching the development of Brian Wu, because if he continues to develop the way we're now seeing Bryce take a step in year 2, this rotation goes from the best in the league to, I mean, it could be a completely new conversation, like a step higher than that, if all 5 of these guys are pitching like that.
Yeah, Wu is just so much fun to watch with that effortless delivery and that two-seamer. That two-seamer is gross. It's gross. So yeah, and like if he's, because we don't really know. We don't know if like he's got anything new that he's been working on that he's ready to pull out. Like we've, obviously, like if you're watching on MILB TV, you've seen a few innings from him, as rehab starts, but like, and we've saw him once during spring, I think. Like, yeah, we haven't seen a lot of him, like, just like as fans, like from our standpoint. So like we don't really know like what this year's version of Brian Wu looks like, and that's very exciting to me as well.
Have you come around on Emerson at all? Like, because we're talking about these 5, and Emerson has stepped in. He's done a remarkable job. I know you and Colby have talked a lot on your podcast, on the Lockdown Mariners
Colby
podcast,
more so than I, but yes.
About just like not really, like not fully buying into Emerson. And, he's not the other 5. He's not, stuff-wise. It's pretty apparent. The numbers reflect that. The stuff reflects it. But, he's pulled into his bag, and when he's needed to this year, he's not only come out and competed, but he's dialed it up to 96 at multiple points throughout his starts, which I'm not sure entering the season I thought he would be breaking out consistently, but in most starts, I think he has brought out that velocity again. I thought once the injuries were piling up in the minors, that velocity was kind of gone and he was going to sit in the lower 90s. But no, he's dialed it back up there again. So, like, has there been any sort of come around on your part?
I still think the offerings are like 45 offerings at best. Because like even the fastball, like he's throwing it hard, but it's still a pretty straight fastball. But the thing that's impressed me is like his command and control, like I said earlier, has taken a significant step over the last couple starts. And I was listening to Logan Gilbert talk to Ryan Roland Smith about him. He was talking about how Emerson is wired a lot similar to Logan, and that he's just kind of a student of the game, really smart pitcher, and I think that's just kind of his best weapon right now. Maybe eventually, I don't think this will happen because like it's a lot to ask of a guy that's dealt with like multiple shoulder injuries and just dealt with kind of the stop and start that he's had to deal with since being drafted, and even going back to his last year at Georgia. But maybe his stuff takes another step forward, but I think right now his best weapon is his brain. He's a really, really intelligent pitcher who I think is capable, and this isn't going to work every time that he's out there. He's until something drastically changes with his stuff, he's going to be prone to getting 8 runs dropped on him any given night. But I think he's smart enough to work around some of his deficiencies and be able to attack hitters. And, and obviously he has a great catcher that he's going to be working with on most nights with Cal Raleigh. And I think those guys, combined will be able to devise some really good game plans to attack hitters. But, I think the biggest thing with Emerson right now is just that he's been able to prove like, okay, there's an actual shot of getting a quality start or two out of this guy, which I wasn't sure of. I wasn't sure if he was even a major league caliber starter, especially after what we saw in Milwaukee. But with how devoid of depth this rotation looked to have heading into the season, it's huge for him to kind of show us what he's shown us, because now you actually have like a number 6 that you feel pretty good about, that you're probably going to need again. Like there should be no question about, should they keep him on the roster over Brian Wu, or, should they employ a 6-man rotation, any of that. That's all nonsense. But the fact that you're probably going to have to call on him again at some point, the fact that he's kind of giving you at least a sense of confidence in him, I think is huge. I think that's massive for him. And then we'll see if he can continue to develop. I don't know if he can, but Colby has used this comp a couple of times. Kyle Gibson, if he's Kyle Gibson, I think that's, and it's probably more like Baltimore Kyle Gibson than Minnesota Kyle Gibson, but still, like, that's fine. If that's your number 6, you'll take that any day of the week.
And he'll still end up being pretty rich. So works out.
Yeah. That's right.
Did you put much stock into this team winning the Rangers series? I know it's only the first series of the year, but when you factor in losing 8 in a row in that ballpark to taking 2 of 3, like, do you take that pretty seriously?
I think it was a big statement for them, especially with how kind of up and down April has been for them in general. And again, this is a team that, you heard the way these guys talked about how, that affected them, seeing those guys go to the playoffs last year, see them clinch in their home ballpark, being as close as they were to, overcoming them in the standings, and then having to watch them go on to win the World Series. Like, for them to go down there and do that, I think was pretty big for them, specifically for the guys that were on that ball club last year, right? Because for some of the new guys, it probably doesn't mean as much to them, right? Because they weren't there. But especially like Mitch Garver, like he clearly doesn't care right about that. Like he went on and got to win a World Series, but but I think for some of those guys, it definitely meant a lot for them. And like you mentioned, like they didn't win a single game down there last year. So to go down there, win 2 in the fashion that they did, the way that they handled them, especially the top of that lineup, I think was really impressive. And I think it gives us a glimpse into, how good this team can be, especially in high leverage games, right? And watching those two teams play one another is a lot of fun, right? Because you have great pitching staff against great offense. How's this going to go, right? Something has to give. And just the dominant pitching, the sense of danger that's just kind of always in the air with that Rangers offense, I think is a lot of fun. Just from like a pure, like, just someone that enjoys watching ball, right? Just loves baseball. Like, that was a really, really fun series to watch because of how those two teams kind of conflict one another.
So, Ty, I think the last thing we want to see about this series with the Rangers, so they go down to Texas and they win. But like the questions I still have regarding that specific matchup, because as the West is sort of shaken out here in the first month, it doesn't seem like the Astros quite have it yet. They might turn it around, but it's looking less and less likely by the week. Don't put much stock into the Angels. Don't put much stock into the A's. So that leaves the Mariners and the Rangers. Can the Mariners go in there with a Bryce Miller and Brian Wu and win a series? Say it's like Bryce, Brian, Luis in the rotation. Could they go to Texas and win a series with those 3? That's like that. I think that's like the next question to answer if there has been a true step forward this year. I have PTSD of what happened last year. Not only did they lose those 8 games, they got crushed in those 8 games. Was not particularly close. And when Bryce and Brian especially went out there and pitched, they got killed. So that's the next thing. Bryce's first start was right in the middle. It wasn't great. Showed some better things.
It wasn't a disaster, but yeah, it was a good thing they got him out of there after 4+. I think we can say that. Even though he only gave up the 2 earned runs, I think it was, I think it's more than fair to say that he probably shouldn't have continued in that game.
Yeah, didn't go out there and really and win the game for him. So then we really get to the Brian Wu factor. We've seen Bryce this year. He's gotten lefties out. That was his Achilles heel. That was both their Achilles heel, but Bryce has gotten lefties out on other teams. We don't know if Brian has gotten those lefties out yet, because AAA lefties are certainly not big league lefties. So, I think that's where I'm at when it comes to how much stock we can put into this Texas series. But overall, 2 of 3 against that team, even with their injuries, without DeGrom, without Scherzer, is 100% a positive sign, because that's 2 games they could use at the end of the season, which they did not have last year. What if they go down and win the first series against the Rangers last year in whenever they played for the first time in Texas? They'd be different. They'd probably be in the playoffs.
Yeah, well, and also they still went up against pretty good pitching for the Rangers. Like Dane Dunning's pretty good. Andrew Heaney, we know that the Mariners have really struggled against him historically. John Gray has really good stuff, and like even that night, he's kind of that type of guy that like his stuff is so good that he can still be effectively wild even when he's not really on his game with the command and the control. And we kind of saw that play out. So, seeing them kind of manage that rotation and then manage that top of the order was really impressive. But yeah, the woo element here, or the woo factor, basically kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Is like, we don't know what Brian Woo looks like yet. We don't know what he's worked on really this offseason. Like, has he developed a pitch here, or has he taken a step forward with one of his already pre-existing pitches that could now serve as a way to get lefties out with some sort of consistency? Is it that two-seamer? Is it something that more so runs in on the hands of guys? Like does he have like I just really, for me, we got to see that until we can say, like, if they can really, like, if they can go down there and do what you're saying, right? Like, go down there with, it's not going to be Kirby, it's not going to be Gilbert. How are you going to win this series with Miller and Woo? And it's just, Woo's kind of the key to that is, can he get those lefties out, especially if he's pitching in that game 2 in that scenario? Because that's going to be a huge game in that scenario. So, and Miller as well, it's just more like, can he hit his spots against that lineup? Right? Because that's what we didn't see that in the first start. He wasn't hitting his spots. His command wasn't good. It was probably 35-40 command that night. Can he hit his spots more consistently? Because now we know, like, he can get lefties out fairly well, and we shouldn't be as concerned about him going up against the Corey Seagers of the world. I mean, you should always be concerned about going up against the Corey Seagers of the world, no matter who's pitching, but like, we're not as concerned about that. That doesn't seem like as much of a free win for Seager in that scenario. But he's got to get the command together against that ball club specifically. And I think that'll eventually happen. But yeah, the big key, like you said, it's Woo. It's Woo. Can he develop something that can get lefties out more consistently? And then can he do that against specifically that Rangers lineup?
Last thing about the baseball on the field, Ty, for me at least.
Yeah.
What's your reaction now that it seems like the Mariners won't have Matt Brash for at least, it feels like it at this point, like a year-long injury, at least. That's what it sort of feels like at this point, that Matt Brash is not going to pitch for at least the rest of this year, if not the beginning of next year as well, and could potentially be longer depending on what happens. How confident are you that the bullpen can sustain what it does without him?
Well, this regime in general, like even the biggest Jerry DiPoto, Justin Hollander detractors have to admit they've been pretty good at developing relievers and plucking these guys seemingly out of thin air. I mean, Gabe Spire now has essentially established himself as one of the best lefty relievers in the entire damn game, right? I think it's pretty clear, like, we can consider Gabe Spire a high leverage reliever, especially with that inning that he had down in Texas, speaking of that series. If they can get Gregory Santos back and they can stay healthy, not just with him, but just across the board, I'm not overly concerned about it. And that's kind of, that's what emphasizes the step forward that Spire has taken, and also the signing of Ryan Stanek even more. Right? I think that those two things are huge. Now, do I think that eventually down the road they might need to make some sort of trade for maybe a more established reliever who's pitching well at the time? Maybe, especially if, like, they kind of take a similar approach to this offseason where it doesn't matter how, or like, it shouldn't matter how many good pitchers you have. Let's just keep on stacking them, right? Like, maybe they trade for Paul Sewald, right? If the Diamondbacks are still kind of middling, maybe they do that.
That would be a fun day.
Right? It would be amazing. But, like, and that's something that I could see potentially happening if the Diamondbacks are just kind of hovering around 500, because Sewald's going to be a free agent at the end of the year. That would make sense for them to possibly trade him. But maybe they do something like that. But also, like, Austin Voth's been pretty good. Trent Thornton's been, I know he the loss goes to him today, but like he's been really good otherwise this year. Like, and I know they really like Tyson Miller, who's been fine so far, and I know they really like God, what's his name? Holloway. Is it Jordan Holloway? He's down in AAA right now. I know they really like him. So they might think that they're fine as is. But I certainly would not be as concerned about things as long as they can stay healthy and they can get Santos back and keep him healthy. And I think they're with the step forward that Spire's taken, they still have 3 high leverage guys at least, and possibly 4 if you want to throw Stanek into the mix.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I think that's more than fine. But yeah, maybe hey, trade for Paul Sewell. That would be great.
What a season that would be. In the course
Insane.
of what, 7 or 8 months, you've traded back for Mitch Haniger and you've traded back for Paul Sewald.
Yeah.
You want to talk about winning over a fan base.
Vibes.
Yeah.
We love vibes, don't we,
Vibes,
folks?
for sure. If we were going to shift gears a little bit into you doing your podcast and you getting into all of this, like we've talked about that, and you've talked about that. You didn't go to school for this. I'm guessing like it wasn't like across your life, you weren't thinking forever that you were going to be a podcaster and all that. But now here we are, and you guys have really built up your podcast in the couple of years you guys have been doing it. So I guess for lack of a better term, like, how did you guys start to see it build up over time?
Well, it was kind of slow, and then it just kind of boomed at like one point. Like it wasn't like this constant progression towards like where we are now. It was like, all right, we were writing over at Soto Mojo for a little while, stopped doing that, had built kind of a following just like on a personal level where like some people like followed us from Soto to doing our Patreon, but we had, I think, like after a month or 2 of doing the Patreon, we had like 30 patrons, something like that, which is good. Like, don't get me wrong, but like, I'm not thinking like, hey, I can quit my day job now, right? Or like, well, this was during the pandemic, so I'm like still thinking like, yeah, once all of this is over, like I'm gonna need to go find a job or like maybe go back to school or like get something jumping off of my life that isn't this, right? But I started writing for Sports Illustrated, covering the Seahawks, and that gave me a lot of really valuable experience, just kind of doing the day-to-day grind of creating content and then starting to do video content on there as well and having to come up with video ideas, etc. That really helped. And then eventually Locked On came along, and we were only doing audio on there for a while, and things were going okay, but we were only making like a couple $100 each. It wasn't really like a huge thing, right? And eventually I things happened over at the site that I was working at. I ended up not working there anymore. I was like, okay, well, I that was fun. I guess I need to, go find something else to do with my life. And it just so happened around that time, the Mariners got really hot in 2022. And then, about a month later, they traded for Luis Castillo, and our subscriber totals just boomed. It was nuts. I think we added like a couple thousand subscribers in like a 10-day span or something like that. It was crazy. And, it's just kind of progressed from that point forward. And, Locked On as a network has started to do a lot better, and, more notable sponsors have come through, which means more money for us. And Colby and I have gotten to a point now where we can make this our full-time jobs. And it's been a lot of fun. And I don't take that for granted whatsoever. I'm still kind of like perplexed by it all, and like, but like you said, this wasn't really the plan, but I didn't really have a plan. So this kind of worked out in a way for me.
That's a long way of saying, for everybody listening, isn't it great what winning can do for everybody? Not just for everybody's like mental state as a sports fan, but like, and we know from doing podcasting or just sports talk in general, when the team you're talking about is doing well, more people want to listen. It's that simple.
I remember I took my wife and her mom out for like a really nice dinner one night, and they were like, "Oh, thank you, Ty. I paid for it, whatever." And they were like, "Thank you, Ty." And I was like, "Don't thank me. Thank the Seattle Mariners." Thank Julio Rodriguez, thank Cal Raleigh, thank Jerry DePoto, thank all of them for creating content for us.
Ty, the thing I like about the Mariners content community, which we can dive into a little bit more, when we were on with you, we spent a lot of time talking about, Mariners content and how everyone is sort of falling into their own niche and creating their own brand of Mariners content, whether it be visual, audio, whatever it is. Which niche do you think you guys occupy? What do you think your specialty is that you occupy?
The thing that we really like, the thing that we enjoy doing the most is like roster building talk. We love that stuff. We love roster building. We love researching and figuring out ways to kind of put the puzzle together. And Colby and I, the reason that we hit it off initially and like wanted to start talking ball with one another, in a more professional setting was we liked what Jerry and company were doing during the rebuild. We got the vision, right? We understood it. We really liked it. And we wanted to see how that developed. And we enjoyed kind of like, our first 2 years of like talking ball was during 2019 and 2020. Some really bad seasons for the team on the field. 2020 wasn't that bad. They were pretty close to actually making the playoffs that year. But like, they weren't supposed to contend. The rosters were pretty ugly, but there was a plan in place, and it was really fun to kind of figure out like how this was all going to take shape eventually in years like 2024, right? So I think that's kind of like what our general appeal was for a lot of people, was like talking about roster building in a more theoretical form, in a theoretical way, right? And really like diving into the nitty gritty of things and really exploring every single possibility. And from that point forward, it's just kind of developed into like, people like us. For us, there's a lot of people that have been enjoying our content from the Soto days, so they're very familiar with us. They've been familiar with us for 6 years now, right? There's people like that, and then there's people that have only been listening since the start of Locked On, which is now like a couple of years. So there's a lot of history there as well. But I think and people like people understand, people that have been around for a while, like they understand like our dynamic, Colby and I's dynamic, which is it's for like the person listening for the first time might not get it, right? But it's very much like a sibling rivalry type of thing, right? And I know a lot of people like that, so I think that's probably kind of part of the niche as well. But I think it really comes down to the roster building stuff. I know a lot of people really like that stuff with us.
You made it a big point of emphasis this offseason, clearly, to bring a lot of these content people in the Mariners community closer together. And like, long story short, I think it succeeded, because while I used to watch all these different people from afar, and I think TJ could say the same, we didn't really know them all that well. But fast forward to now, between you doing your content creator spotlight and just providing, like, bringing out some more opportunities for people to connect, that do similar things. And now there's people in this community, you included, some other people included, that we'll message all the time and we'll just talk Mariners with all the time. And it's much more commonplace now. So like, what was your motivation for doing that when you started that this winter?
If you're on Mariners Twitter, you know that it's pretty tribalistic, right? There's all these like different like cliques and groups of people, and all these cliques kind of have like beef with one another and all this stuff. It's weird. Like, it's very high school. It's like, I just want to watch baseball. I love the Mariners. They're, they've obviously been awful to watch for most of our lives, but I love the team. I'm never going to quit the team. I like what they're doing right now. I like where they're heading. I think they're a lot of fun. Like, everyone just chill. And, like I said earlier, like, I don't take this stuff for granted. I don't take the position that I'm in for granted. And I don't, like, I think I talked to you guys about this when I had you guys on, like, I don't view anyone that like is coming into the space or having success like you guys are. Right? You guys have had a lot of great success here, especially as of late. Like, I don't view that as like, oh, it's competition, right? Like, I just look at it like, it's great that people want to talk about the Seattle Mariners in a positive light too. Like, that's what attracted me to your guys' podcast to begin with was like, okay, they're being fair, right? Like you guys will criticize the team just like we will, like whenever there's something that you don't like, but overall, like you're not super reactionary. You're not calling for people's heads after one bad game, etc. Like, and you're not doing the whole like, well, that's just the same old Mariners. Woe is me. I'm just a Mariners fan, you know, and like, which like, fine, great. But like, I find that act kind of tiring after a while. And, I wanted to engage, with creators that are excited about creating content about the team, that truly love the team, want to talk about the team, and, you know, create communities to engage with, right? And if I can help in growing those communities in any sort of capacity, I wanted to do that. So, and I know, you know, with how big our platform has gotten, that I could help with that, because I saw what I was able to do for like Ben Ranieri, right? Like I had Ben on my show last summer, and Ben later that night told me like he had by far his best day in terms of getting subscribers on his Substack. I was like, well, I should do this more. So I had thought about it for a while. I wasn't really sure how to do it. And then we Locked On required us to go back to 5 shows a week, because like during the off season we go to 3 shows a week for a little while around winter meetings. But they asked us to go back to 5 shows a week like 2 weeks earlier than we expected. And I was like, well, how are we going to fill all these days with shows? So there's no more perfect time than now to start the content creator thing. So I reached out to you guys and a couple other creators, and I want to do more of it over the course of the season. Like there's still quite a few creators that I haven't been able to do that with yet. But I think it's really cool to just kind of bring the community together, because there's so much toxicity and tribalism and all this weird stuff in the community, more so on Mariners Twitter than really anywhere, right? Which is only like a certain sect of the fan base and isn't representative at all of the entire fan base. I know that. But it is where, you know, a lot of us do reside, unfortunately. And, you know, I just want to try and like dispel that as much as I possibly can and try and bring all of us kind of closer together. Right. Like the coolest thing for me, was seeing, you guys know Jake from You Love to See It. Yeah. So like seeing like Jake, like now kind of like interact with some of the other like creators. Like, it's not just like I'm like at the center of it and everyone just like communicates with one another through me or because of me or whatever. It's like they've all kind of branched off and started doing their own thing too. And I think that's awesome, right? Like just everyone's kind of coming together and like doing their own thing though, that way. Like, I think that's really cool.
Do you think that's maybe a status or sort of expectation of, say, like the younger set, the not the traditional media types, but us, the people who, you know, create content from our bedrooms and scream at a microphone after our regular 9-to-5 day jobs? Like, do you think that's something different of us, that there's not as much? It doesn't need to be as much of a competition. It can be more of instead a collaborative effort that, you know, again, like everyone has their own niche. But we're all like, right, you know, we're all working in this together still to, you know, bring more fans to the game, find different ways to engage people. And overall, I feel like it benefits all of us if there are more people interested.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And look, you know, like I saw, I've seen quite a few comments on our shows that are like, or like in the past, like a couple of years ago, right before like you guys really started, or like really anyone else was really doing this, where it was like, I don't really like this podcast, but it's all we have. So like, look, and I get it. Like, if you're not a fan of my show, totally fine. That's cool. Like, but like, you know, if there are other options for you, go explore those. Totally fine with that. And so like, I'm glad that there are more options for people, because look, I'm not going to appeal to everyone. You guys aren't going to appeal to everyone. Mariner Mojo isn't going to appeal to everyone. But I think like if every like Mariners fan like finds a content creator or two that they can engage with, I think it's great that people are engaging overall with the team more, and they're finding ways to engage with the team more. They're finding ways to engage with their passion more, right? So I think that's awesome. And yeah, like I said, like I don't view it as a competition. I view it as like we all kind of like need one another, right? And like, you know, for me, it's a business, you know, to a certain degree. Like this is my full-time job, whereas, you know, for other people that are just getting started, it's not. But maybe one day it eventually can be. And if I can help facilitate that in any sort of way or help springboard you in any sort of way, I want to try and do that. Because like Jason Churchill, who's friend of our show, friend of your show, like he did that for Colby and I when he didn't have to. Like we like when we stopped working over at Soto and Colby and I didn't really know what we were gonna do. Colby just kind of cold called Church and asked him like, hey, like we don't really know what to do. Do you have any advice for us? And Church sat down with us maybe a couple hours later for like 2 hours and just like went through everything with us and helped us kind of develop a vision for what we wanted to do next. And then when Locked On started looking for a new host of Locked On Mariners, Church recommended us to them. And like he's like the reason that we got Locked On Mariners. So like I want to try and like pay that forward, right? And you know, and I hope to instill that in other people as well. Like, you know, once like you guys get established or, you know, Jake gets established or, you know, whoever, right? Just for the sake of the example, you know, when they get established that they pass that down to whoever is starting out and gives them an opportunity to start building their community. Cause, I think there's a space for all of us. I think there's a space for more people to join into this thing. I constantly encourage people that, you know, who ask, you know, how to get started in this, like just to do it. Because I think there are an infinite amount of ways to create content around this team. And it's great the bigger the community gets, because like Seattle is a sleeping giant, especially when it comes to baseball. Like this fan base is a sleeping giant. And I know that it can be a brand that is up there with the best of the best. I truly believe that. And I think like we can all kind of build a community that rivals that of like the Yankees community and the Dodgers community. Even though this is a smaller state and a smaller market, I still think we can do that because of, I mean, just look at the iconography of Seattle sports in general, right? Look at the Sonics. Look at like how much people still to this day talk about the Sonics, wear Sonics gear. Yesterday I was at the Blue Jays game and I saw 2 guys wearing Sonics hats, right? With their like Maple Leafs jerseys on. Like look at how much people talk about King Griffey Jr. LeBron James says King Griffey Jr. is his favorite athlete growing up. Like, you know, Julio, like when Julio went off at the Derby, you saw like Steph Curry talking about him and all that. Like the Mariners and Seattle sports in general have a very special, they have very special iconography that I think can really, like if they can have a fan base that, or like a community of content creators that can really get the word out and make them bigger than just, you know, that can go beyond just kind of like the local fan base and can help expand like the allure of the team beyond just the state of Washington, then yeah, and I think this community is totally capable of that.
Last question I have for you, Ty, and it's a little bit of a generalized question, but I think it's an interesting talking point with the more and more creators that are coming into the space paired with how media is starting to trend these days. You're not going to have a perfect answer for this, but to just take your best crack at this, 10 years from now, what does Mariners coverage look like?
Ideally, we have something that's similar to John Boy, similar to Barstool, minus the, you know, the issues over there. That's similar to, you know, they again goes beyond the state, goes beyond the local allure of the teams, right? And this goes beyond just the Mariners, right? I think some of this is going to be like the return of the Sonics will help, because there's already, like, again, like I was saying earlier, there's already a lot of national interest in that. But the Mariners being good, the Mariners like, some of this is just out of our hands, right? Some of this is just like the teams have to play at a high level, right? So, the Mariners getting to what I think we all think their ceiling ultimately is, like, that's going to be a big part of it as well. But I think this community, again, like I said earlier, is more than capable of building something that goes beyond just the local allure of the teams. So hopefully that's where it is in 10 years. Hopefully there is something that's like that, where, we're attracting fans to, like, we're making the Mariners more of like an icon, right? More of an icon franchise. We're making the Seahawks more of an icon franchise. We're making the Kraken more of an icon franchise. We're making the Sonics more of an icon franchise. I think that it's the history of these teams, and again, we have Julio here, right? We have, we'll see what the Seahawks can do now in this new era once the Sonics come back. Like, there's going to be a lot of things that I think are really going to interest people around the country and around the globe. And I hope, again, like, some of it is just going to rely on the teams performing, but I hope that's what this ends up looking like in 10 years from now, because I think it's definitely possible.
Ty, this has been awesome. I know I can speak for Lyle in this fact that we both really appreciate the relationship that has grown between our two podcasts and us and you, and us being on yours, and you now finally coming on ours. It's been, it's been a big help. You guys are certainly an inspiration in this Mariners content creator community, and you will continue to do so as well, and we hope to pass that message forward as well. So, Ty, thanks so much for taking some time to join us here today.
Appreciate it, guys.
Really appreciate all the time Ty gave us. We enjoyed talking with him a bunch, and being a part of this Mariners content community has been a lot of fun for all of us, and to continue to meet more people within the group and within the community. It's been really cool to see the evolution of it, and I think it's going to keep evolving, as we talked about with Ty. So with that, that'll just about wrap up this edition of the Marine Layer podcast. You guys know the drill. If you want to keep following all of our stuff and you want to listen to the podcasts every week, make sure to download our episodes on the audio side. That's on Apple and Spotify, wherever you get your audio podcast. Make sure to leave a 5-star review, leave a written review, all that good stuff. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and check us out on social media too. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube Shorts at Marine Layer Pod. That's TJ. I'm Lyle. As always, we thank you guys for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon.